The Shadow of Yorktown, the spy who forged a nation. History remembers the names Washington, Jefferson, and Hamilton. We build monuments to their faces and name cities after their legacies. But the American Revolution was not won solely on the battlefield or in the halls of Congress. It was won in the whispered secrets of a kitchen, in the folded notes hidden in a boot heel, and by a man who was legally considered property while he fought for the freedom of his oppressors. This is the true, incredible story of James Armistead, the slave who became America's most dangerous double agent.
Chapter 1. The Choice at the Crossroads. The year was 1781. Virginia was burning. The air in New Kent County smelled of cured tobacco and the metallic tang of approaching war. James, a man of sharp intellect and quiet observation, stood outside the plantation house of William Armistead. James was a slave, but his mind was never shackled. He followed the news of the rebellion with a fervor that surprised his master. When the Marquis de Lafayette, the young and fiery French aristocrat, arrived in Virginia to stop the British advance, James saw an opening. He didn't run for his own freedom. He asked for permission to fight for it. "You want to join the Frenchmen?" William Armistead asked, looking at James. "The British promise us freedom if we serve the crown," James replied, his voice steady. "But if the Americans win and I help them, what then?" With a letter of transition, James walked into the camp of the Marquis de Lafayette. The young Frenchman looked at the tall, composed Virginian and saw something the British would consistently overlook: a man who could become invisible. Chapter 3. The Double Game. This is where the story becomes truly astounding. James Armistead became a double agent. The British, impressed by James's loyalty and his ability to navigate the Virginia woods, asked him to spy on the Americans. James agreed. He began feeding the British carefully constructed lies, misinformation written by Lafayette himself, while bringing the cold, hard truth of British movements back to the Continental Army. In the heat of the summer of 1781, James delivered the most critical piece of intelligence in the entire war. He informed Lafayette that Cornwallis was moving his army to a small port town called Yorktown. Cornwallis believed he was waiting for British ships to evacuate him. But because of James's reports, Washington and the French fleet knew exactly where to trap him. Chapter 4. The Silence of Victory. The Siege of Yorktown ended in a British surrender. The world turned upside down. As the British marched out, James Armistead stood on the sidelines, watching the men he had deceived. Lord Cornwallis himself rode past. He spotted James standing near Lafayette. The British general was stunned. He realized in that moment that his loyal servant was the reason he had lost the war. But the tragedy of history began here. When the war ended, James Armistead was sent back to the plantation. The 1783 Act of the Virginia Assembly granted freedom to slaves who had served as soldiers. James had been a spy. Technically, the law. Chapter 5. The Marquis returns. For years, James petitioned for his freedom. He was a hero in the shadows, but a slave in the light. It wasn't until 1784 that the Marquis de Lafayette, horrified to find his friend still enslaved, wrote a testimonial. "This is to certify that James has done essential services. He properly acquitted himself with some important communications I gave him, and appears to be entitled to every reward his situation can admit of." In 1787, James was finally freed.
In a final act of respect, he took the name James Armistead Lafayette.